NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins, who's been doing some reporting on the extensive online footprint of the individual who's been apprehended. What can you tell us?
So this was a person who had a blog. At least that's the blog that the police are looking at right now. And in that blog, you saw constant conspiracy, basically. In the conspiracy that you and I probably know very much about. The QAnon stuff, the Pizzagate stuff, basically this idea that a cabal runs everything. Lots of stuff about pedophilia and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, it also seems from what I've been able to see, and I've seen some of the post itself, this is someone who went through a kind of ideological journey that is actually quite common, which is people who sort of have this kind of anti-establishment distrust as their sort of core belief. And I've watched people, including people that I know are in my social circle, and I imagine people watching this show have watched this happen, right, of going through that and then moving to Pizzagate and then to anti-vax stuff and to QAnon, and the next thing you know to these sort of like very MAGA-aligned sort of authoritarian views.
Right, and we don't want to get out ahead of what the police know and the facts here. Yeah. We absolutely do not. But we do know that. We know this kind of person, right? We know people from California who wind up at this very MAGA worldview and start in natural health spaces, or start in a thing that you would start in Berkeley, California.
Natural food, yoga, crystals. Yeah. I mean, this is something that I have seen over and over. And friend Brandy Zadrozny, who you do great reporting with, has documented a lot of folks, particularly in the QAnon movement, sort of coming from that place.
Yeah, and that is like you said, it's not unique, but it's also it's something that the far right is trying to absorb recently. You see this a lot, like with the Tulsi Gabbard types and things like that. In the non-extremist spaces, they're trying to bring in people from that natural health space. You see it a lot on TikTok too, right? You see constantly people talking about not just crystals, but how to eat only paleo stuff or things like that, not to trust GMO stuff. Things that used to be associated with the American left are now associated with the TikTok right, basically.
And again, to the extent that this is the blog that this individual held, and we know that police are looking at the same blog that you and I have been looking at images from. This is pretty clear someone who's just very immersed in like the most sort of violent, seething, paranoid worldview of that, QAnon, anti-Semitic kind of right.
Right, and I think the important thing here when we're talking about that cabal that, is very pervasive right now. On the
in the imagination of these people, not in reality.
Not in reality, because that explains everything. That explains why they feel like they're losing power, why the vaccine stuff is happening. There's this thing with transhumanism that secretly they're trying to take away your power by putting trans people more into your life, and taking absolutely absurd, like robotic conspiracy theories. That is very big in these spaces with these specific people, and it was all there. It was all exactly in those blogs that he wrote.
I'm reminded of an individual, Cesar Sayoc, who's I think we don't think about a lot, but if people remember, it was exactly 4 years ago, right around now, that he sent bombs to a bunch of prominent folks. Hillary Clinton was one of them. George Soros, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. The bombs didn't go off, but he had actually created them. And he was a guy who'd sort of gotten radicalized. He was much more squarely a Trump guy. He had been to a bunch of rallies. He had a truck. But this was someone who sort of went down a rabbit hole, and the rabbit hole ended at political violence.
Yeah, and by the way, the synagogue shooter as well on Gab was radicalized in the same 2-week span right before midterms. Right. This might just be something that happens at midterms while we're at this fever pitch, where people are constantly told, you might lose all of your rights in 2 weeks, right? When it becomes really readily apparent to people that the enemy is right there. You can look up their address. And that's what they've decided to do, is to preempt it with violence instead of going through democracy.
I do wonder about what the reverberations will be like. We should say that he was again, as far as we know, keeping a very old school blog. This was actually not on. This was on Facebook. It wasn't on the social media networks. It was in the kind of forum that I frankly came up using, right? Just like a random person puts up a blog on the internet. Had been doing that for many years. But of course, like the question of this kind of trajectory is front of mind for basically anyone that's in any position of power at any tech company right now dealing with content moderation.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Probably not quite so much Elon Musk,
right?
Based on what he said recently. But it is, and that's the thing, is Facebook has whole teams dealing with this explicit kind of thing, like what crosses the line, how do we how do we identify what exactly the line is so people don't get sort of shifted into that direction. You know, they realized they had a funneling problem with QAnon people.
Yep.
And they tried to cut it off at the stem. Elon Musk sounds like he doesn't really care about that funnel.
Yeah.
At best, right?
Although we should also say, look, people are capable of radicalizing through all different kinds of means, regardless of what social media platform they're on. Ben Collins, thank you so much for being with us and for your reporting.